Okay, so today we're going to be going over the differences between plant and animal cells. Okay, and we're going to be looking at what we call the modes of nutrition. That was actually one of the things that was on the quiz we did right yesterday that I hadn't taught you. So we'll be looking at the modes of nutrition, and then we'll be looking at how those influence or affect the structure of both plant and animal cells. Because your mode of nutrition is how you get your chemical energy that your cells use to power themselves. Okay, so your mode of nutrition is essentially how do you get your sugar. Right? Sugar is the fuel for all cells. Okay? Glucose in particular is the fuel for all cells. No matter what we eat, it eventually gets turned into glucose because that's the thing that our cells can burn for energy. Okay? They can't burn anything else. Okay? Yeah, sure. If we eat fats, fats can be turned into glucose. Okay? But we don't burn the fats directly to release their energy. They actually have to be broken down by our cells first and turned into glucose. Now, with fats, that process is pretty easy. That's why fats are a high energy food. Okay? They can very quickly be turned into sugars, which can then be used for energy. Okay? Obviously, carbohydrates are even more easily converted into sugars because essentially that's what carbohydrates are. Okay? They are long carbon-hydrogen chains. Okay? They can easily be broken down into smaller pieces and used for energy. Okay? Proteins, on the other hand, are not easily converted into glucose. Okay? Your body actually has to expend energy in order to process proteins and turn them into energy-yielding molecules. Right? That's why there's so many like weight loss diets out there that are very protein-focused. Okay? Like these ketosis kind of diets and things like that, where you eat lots of protein and that's going to help you lose weight. And it's true because, again, proteins are not a really big energy-yielding molecule, so it's harder to turn them into glucose, so you actually don't get as much energy value from eating protein as you do from eating carbohydrates. Okay, so most diets, first thing they ask you to cut out is carbs. Second thing is fats. Okay, yeah, well, sugars are carbs. So carbs and fats are the two things they ask you to take out because those are the things that contain the most energy. Okay, for plants, they get their glucose from what? From the sun, from photosynthesis. Okay, they take in carbon dioxide. Okay, and they break it down. That's what the sun, the solar energy is actually used to break down carbon dioxide and water, and then those two molecules are reassembled into glucose. Okay, the reaction actually looks something like this, and it's one of the first things you'll learn in Bio 20. Okay, we have carbon dioxide and water, okay, and light, and that will form C6H12O6 plus, oops, that 6 is way too big, O6 plus oxygen. Okay, that's the process of photosynthesis, the chemical reaction of photosynthesis. Okay, once the plants have made their sugar, or you or I have consumed something that can be turned into glucose, the opposite reaction occurs. Okay, that was bigger. Okay, so this is the reaction for photosynthesis, which directly and indirectly powers all organisms on Earth. It directly powers plants, obviously, okay, but it also indirectly gives us our energy because either we're eating plants directly or we're eating the animals that ate the plants. So, or we're eating the animals that ate the plants. She swallowed the spider to catch the fly. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the opposite reaction is this one. Glucose, C6H12O6 plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide and water. Okay, this reaction is cellular respiration. It is the energy-yielding reaction of basically all living things. There are a few exceptions, okay, that live in like the deep sea benthic environments around volcanic vents where there's no light, and a few things that live in like hot springs and stuff like that. They use slightly different stuff. Okay, so this one up here is photosynthesis. Okay, and this one is cellular respiration. Now, as you can see, one is the backwards way of writing the other. All right, so what we essentially have then is the carbon cycle. We probably took that like science or not. Okay, so this is what drives essentially all living things on Earth. Is the carbon cycle and these two reactions. Now, your modes of nutrition that a cell uses are based around whether they're part of the photosynthesis part or the cellular respiration part. Now, all organisms are part of the cellular respiration part, including plants. Okay? Plants only use photosynthesis to get their sugar. Okay? If you're not a plant, then you get your sugar by eating something else. Okay? So that's what we're going to look at today. How do those two modes of nutrition affect the structure of your cells? You're still writing down those reactions? Okay, so modes of nutrition. Okay, there's obviously subtle differences between plant and animal cells, and the different modes of nutrition is where the biggest differences occur, or why the biggest differences occur. Okay, obviously, if you're a carnivore, okay, you eat other organisms for food. Okay, if you're a herbivore, you eat other organisms for food. Those organisms just happen to be plants. Okay, or you're an omnivore, like we are. Okay, or like grizzly bears, or monkeys, whatever. Okay, you eat anything. Okay, being an omnivore is obviously a bit of a survival advantage because you can eat many different things. Okay, and in reality, most animals are omnivores. Okay, like even something like your dog, which you think of a dog as a carnivore. Occasionally, dogs will eat other things. They're opportunistic, just like any other animal is. If they're starving, they'll eat anything. Okay, sometimes it isn't good for them. Okay, it's like my dog, which is cute but stupid, and got like tipped over the compost thing and ate 20 chicken wings. That day did not end well for him.
Did he die?
No, he didn't die. I had to take him to the vet, and then the two vets argued about how they were going to get the chicken wings out of him. Okay, you should have seen the X-ray. Like, it was crazy. Okay, his tiny little stomach is just full of all these jagged, broken chicken bones. Okay, and it was crazy. So they're like, no, we'll just let him poop it out. No, we'll puke him right now. And like, God, just make up your mind. Like, well, what do you want us to do? I brought him here because you're supposed to know that. Anyway, they ended up puking him, but yeah. So they'll eat anything, right? And most animals will. Okay, in the same way that plants will take pretty much any light they can get because, well, that'll help them to power photosynthesis. Now, do certain colors of light help them better? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the most important wavelengths of light for a plant are actually like the red wavelengths. Okay? Green is actually the least important. That's why plants are green. They actually reflect that away. Okay, so the subtle differences between plant and animal cells. Okay, so we're going to look at those. So the first mode of nutrition is what we call a chemoheterotroph. Okay, chemo meaning chemicals, hetero meaning others, okay, or many, and troph is feeding. So these are chemical other feeders. They get their chemical energy from other organisms by eating them. Okay, chemoheterotrophs. Okay, so animals are chemoheterotrophs. Right? They have to consume chemicals from other organisms to make energy. Okay, that can be any type of thing. Okay, they could even be decomposer animals like earthworms and things like that. They're still getting their energy from other organisms. Those organisms just aren't something they have to kill. Okay, they just eat the partially decomposed material in the ground, the dirt. Fungus, same thing. Okay, a fungus is actually a chemoheterotroph. Okay? It consumes organic molecules for food. Now, it doesn't obviously have a mouth. It's not chewing stuff. Okay? But they do have what looks almost under a microscope like a root system. Okay? Which is why for such a long time they were also incorrectly put in the plant kingdom. They really bear a very strong resemblance to plants. The problem is that they don't use photosynthesis for energy. Okay? They have these little roots, okay, called hyphae. Okay? And these hyphae will secrete digestive enzymes. So imagine the roots of a plant, but they secrete the same kind of chemicals that are in your stomach. They secrete that stuff outside of them, and it digests the material around the hyphae, and then they absorb the nutrients. So it's almost like their stomach is inside out. Okay? For us, we consume stuff, it goes into our stomach secretes the enzymes, and the digestion occurs internally. For a fungus, their digestion is external. Okay? The outside of their hyphae secrete the same kind of chemicals and digest the food that they're growing in, okay? And then they absorb the nutrients. So if you leave like some bread out and it gets all moldy, okay? Well, what's happening there is that the mold is putting its hyphae through the bread, okay? Or if you see like cheese that gets mold on it, okay? It's putting the hyphae through the cheese. So incidentally, just cutting the mold off, you're only cutting off the reproductive structures. Okay? The hyphae could still be in the part of the cheese that didn't look like it was rotten. Okay? It probably in the end wouldn't hurt you too much, but just so you know. So they're digesting this stuff externally. Now, there are some fungi that are parasitic, like athlete's foot. Why is athlete's foot itchy? Because it's eating you. Okay? That's why athlete's foot is itchy. There's also a very similar fungus that grows on your scalp. How many of you really want to scratch your head right now? Okay? Yeah. Love doing that. Okay, so what happens is these fungi, okay, their hyphae they go into your skin, okay, and they secrete the digestive enzymes, and they essentially digest your cells. Okay, they're using you for food. They're growing on you and using you for food. Okay, and that's why they're itchy. They just cause that itching because they're essentially eating you. Kind of gross, but that's the truth. Okay, they're a chemoheterotroph. They're eating their food source. Okay, and then obviously a top carnivore like a shark eats whatever it can swim away. Hopefully not you. Okay, yeah. All right. So for chemoheterotrophs, their cells have to contain certain organelles, especially these, lysosomes. Okay? Lysosomes contain digestive enzymes that can break down food molecules into other simpler forms. They're essentially the stomach of the cell. Okay, so lysosomes are membrane-enclosed organelles. Okay, organelles are cell organs. Okay, and so they have a membrane around them. So the cell has a membrane. Okay, but then the organelles inside each have their own membrane. Okay, and the reason for that is it allows them to kind of close off an area where the process they carry out can be carried out. Because lots of times the process that one organelle needs requires different conditions than the conditions another organelle would need. Right? So for example, inside the mitochondria, where glucose is broken down for energy, okay, it gets really hot, and certain chemicals and things are needed in there. Okay? Whereas inside the lysosome, it needs to be actually fairly acidic, and there's digestive enzymes in there that would eat the cell where they allow it to get out. Right? Those are obviously two different environments that we'd like to keep separate. All right, so they contain digestive enzymes, okay, that break down food molecules for energy. So lysosomes are something that animal cells will have, plant cells don't. Okay, even the plant cells of a carnivorous plant do not have lysosomes. All right, so if you're thinking of like a Venus flytrap or a sundew or a pitcher plant, okay, they're carnivorous plants, but they actually don't use the bugs that they capture for a lot of food energy. Okay? Mostly they use them for like nutrients and minerals. Okay? They don't actually get a lot of food energy out of those things. They're still primarily photosynthetic.
So plants don't have lysosomes.
Plants do not have lysosomes. No. Okay. So within the animal cell, okay, because animals are chemoheterotrophs, obviously they have the lysosomes, but they also don't have a cell wall. And that's because animals have to do what? They have to move. Okay? If all of your cells had cell walls, you would look like a block. Okay? Like you'd look like you were like from Minecraft. Okay? And it would be really hard. It would be really hard to move because you wouldn't be flexible. You'd be like all stiff. Okay? Your cells wouldn't flex like they do for us because we don't have cell walls. We just have these nice flexible cell membranes that change shape easily. We also have what's called a cytoskeleton. It's not really bones. It's really a misnomer. But the cytoskeleton is actually these fibrous structures, almost like cables, that attach to different parts of the inside of the cell membrane, okay, and they can stretch, maybe not cables, maybe more like bungee cords, okay, more like that, okay, and they attach. So when the cell bends and changes shape, it can only bend so far, okay. It's flexible, it can go so far, but we don't want it to rupture, okay. Now, are there some cells in your body that do rupture? Yeah, your muscle cells, okay. That's actually how you build muscle. When you work out, you rupture, you break muscle cells, okay? Breaking muscle fibers. They also grow back really, really quickly, and when they grow back bigger and stronger, right? Okay, that's how bodybuilding and training and stuff works. You break them, they come back. Okay, you break too many at once, that's an injury. Okay, if you break a whole bunch of muscle fibers at one time, that's a muscle tear. Okay, you don't want that. That's bad. It takes a long time for that to heal. Sometimes has to be surgically repaired. Okay.
Snap something, like if your Achilles tendon just snaps. Like
that's a tear. Yeah. So that's Now, most of the time with a tendon, it isn't in the middle of the tendon. It's usually the attachment point to the bone where you tear it, and so that can be a problem. Like if you tear your ACL, for example, very rarely do people tear that right smack in the middle. It's usually torn at the insertion point. And then that creates even more problems because it usually pulls a bunch of cartilage out of the bottom of the knee as well. And so then, it has to be surgically reattached. The cartilage has to be arthroscopically repaired. Like that. Okay. But you can tear things. Okay. If you tear a muscle, okay, that's also excruciatingly painful. I watched a guy tear his hamstring, and it rolls up into his glute, like those old projector screens. When you pull them down, they snap up. That's what it looked like. And the guy went down, like he just down on the ground, rolled a couple times, and lay there screaming. Okay. You don't want to break too many of those. But muscles and all cells in an animal are somewhat flexible. They have to be because we're mobile. Okay, we got to be able to catch our food. All right. If we can't move around, we're not going to catch much food, and we're going to starve. So we have to have these flexible cells, okay, in order to do that. Right? The rest of the cell is fairly similar to a plant cell. Okay? Plant cells are going to have some things that we don't. Okay? But we have a lysosome, they don't have that. Okay? They have a cell wall, we don't have that, nor do we want. And they have chloroplasts. Now, chloroplasts would be actually pretty good if we had those. Okay? If I got hungry, I'd just have to turn on the light. Or walk outside. So that'd be sweet. Oh, sweet, I'm not hungry anymore. Okay, but obviously through the night that could be a problem. But you wouldn't have that issue. So animal cells often contain fibrous materials. That would be the cytoskeleton. Okay, that allow the cell to change shape. Also, animal cells have only the flexible membrane as their outer border. Okay, so those are some of the characteristics of the cells of a chemoheterotroph. Exception being fungi. Okay. Fungi don't move, so they actually do have cell walls. They're a chemoheterotroph that actually have cell walls. Okay, but their cell walls are very different in their structure from plant cell walls. The cell walls of a fungus are like the shell or the carapace of a bug. It's made of the same material, that chitinous hard material. Okay, if you are not a chemoheterotroph, you are a photoautotroph. Okay, which means light self-feeding. Okay, they use light to feed themselves. Photoautotroph. Okay. So anything that isn't autotroph can feed itself. Photoautotroph can feed itself using light. The organisms that live in those like volcanic vents at the bottom of the ocean are often referred to as chemoautotrophs. Okay, their chemicals in the water can be absorbed and they can feed themselves from that. Okay. It's a process that actually looks a lot like photosynthesis, but it has different chemicals.
Does photosynthesis have anything to do with photons? Like the way like
yes.
a solar panel would?
Yes. Yeah, photo means light, and so we call the particles that light is made up of are called photons. So the unit of light energy. Sort of a particle, sort of a wave. Get into that in physics learning. It's the wave-particle duality of light. Okay, so plant cells produce their own food by capturing sunlight and using its power to remove carbon from carbon dioxide and also to separate hydrogen and oxygen, water. Okay, then they can recombine to produce glucose, which can then be used in the same way that we use glucose, through cellular respiration. So that's going to lead to, obviously, some differences in the structure of plant cells. Now, plants are not mobile. Okay, so they have to be able to support themselves because their main resources are light and water. Okay, now the real problem with that is light and water are located in opposite places. Water in the ground, light in the air. Okay, so a plant needs to be able to get to both of those environments. So it's got to be able to grow roots, and it's got to be able to get tall so that it doesn't get shaded out, or it can shade out its competition. Okay, one or the other. So because of that, plants, first off, have to have a photosynthetic organ. Okay, that photosynthetic organ, or organelle, is the chloroplast. Okay, so named because it's full of chlorophyll. Okay, that's where the chlorophyll can be found within the plant cell. Okay, within these thylakoids here. Okay, these small stack-like things. Okay, that's where the bulk of the photosynthesis and the photosynthetic pigments are stored. Okay, now plants have to support long stems and leaves. That's what the cell walls help them to do. Okay, a cell wall is a fairly rigid structure made of something called cellulose. Okay, we typically refer to that as dietary fiber. Right, so if your mom or your dad uses like Metamucil, I have Metamucil every morning. It's good for you. Okay, it's fiber, right? And that comes from the fibrous parts, cell walls of plants. Okay? Now, for us, the purpose of eating fiber is what? It helps you poop. Yeah. Okay. It keeps you regular, right? The reason it does that is because we can't digest it. Okay. Cellulose is something that we don't have any digestive enzymes that will break down. So when we eat anything made of cellulose, it basically goes right through us unchanged. You can think about some foods that might go through you unchanged, like corn.
Yeah.
Okay? The outside husk of corn, okay, is full of lots of cellulose. Okay? If you eat a lot of whole grains, okay, similar thing there. The outside part of whole grains is made of cellulose. We can't digest it, doesn't break down in our body. It just goes through and acts like a brush. It cleans you up. It's good for you. You don't want the stuff that's in your large intestine to stay there for long periods of time, because it's full of bacteria. Well, no, not tapeworm. You have to actually eat the eggs of the tapeworm. They don't magically just appear. Okay? But we're talking lots of bacteria, especially things like E. coli and stuff like that. Okay? We don't want those things to stay in our body. We don't want the stuff because it's decayed. You don't want it to stay in your body and decay in there, so fiber helps to ensure it gets all out of you, okay? And that's good for you.
Next, you put cellulose and Parmesan. It's like so make it doesn't clump up, they put cellulose in there to make it.
Yes, the processed stuff. Yeah,
So
for sure.
that's why like Parmesan usually is super loose, but if you get real Parmesan, it's like stiff and sticks together.
Right. Yeah. They actually use cellulose in a lot of. They added to a lot of things for that purpose. Yeah. Okay. So the other thing that plants have to have, they have these nice stiff cell walls, but the cell walls by themselves are not enough to support the plant. Okay? If the plant isn't well hydrated, what does it look like?
That almost dead.
Well, almost dead, but it wilts, right? Like it gets kind of floppy. Okay? No, I just watered my plants, so none of them look this way. But I have this video of it. I took a time lapse. It did it totally by accident too. Okay, what happens to the plant is when it wilts and then gets rehydrated again. So what happens is inside of a plant cell, we don't have these in animal cells. There's a large water vacuole, okay, which is basically just a big water balloon that's inside. When it's full of water, it exerts pressure from the inside of the cell against the cell wall, okay, and that helps to support the plant. If that plant starts to get dehydrated, water will start to come out of that by osmosis. Okay, it's not a reserve. The plant doesn't like, oh, well, I still have this big reserve of water. I'll just take it from there. It actually has no control over that. It just comes out. As this water vacuole drains, its ability to push on the outside of the cell wall decreases, and the cell will wilt, and so will the whole plant. Okay? If that gets really bad, then it gets dry and crunchy, and it can't come back. right? But I'll show you quickly here this accidental time lapse that I did. Okay, so does that make some sense? Okay, so differences in the plant cell versus the animal cell. You see more of the differences in the plant cell because it's got more stuff. It's got the chloroplasts, okay? It's got the cell wall. It's got the water vacuole. Those are kind of the big three things that a plant cell has, okay, or a photoautotroph would have that a chemoheterotroph would not have, okay? But remember that a plant cell also still has a cell membrane. We just don't see it because it's inside of the cell wall, okay? Now, the other thing we need to know about the cell wall is its function. The cell wall is not really a wall, okay? It's not a barrier. It's a support. It's a scaffold, okay? So if you've ever seen a house get framed, okay, the walls go up and there's just a frame until they put the plywood on the outside, okay? A cell wall is like those walls before the plywood goes on the outside. It's a frame, not really a wall. Okay? So anything can get through the cell wall, but the cell wall will support the cell. Okay? So it's not a barrier, it's just a supportive structure. Right? But we always see it, it looks like this, and it looks like it's a solid thing that protects the cell. A cell wall serves zero protective function at all. Okay? It has no ability to protect the cell from anything. It's just a supportive structure. Okay? All right. So plant and animal cells compared. Okay, so if we're looking at animal cell here on the left, plant cell here on the right, okay, we still see a lot of similar structures, right? We see obviously the large nucleus, okay, in the middle, right? The nucleus contains the cell's genetic material, okay, the DNA of the cell, okay? That's where all of that is stored, okay? Now, probably somewhere along the way somebody told you that the nucleus is the brain of the cell. It's not a brain, okay? It's not a brain. There's no decision-making going on in the nucleus, okay? The nucleus stores information. If the nucleus is anything, the nucleus is a library, okay? Information is stored there, but there isn't much control being exerted by the nucleus, okay? Now, inside the nucleus is a small structure here called the nucleolus, okay? There's usually a smaller, darker circle inside the nucleus. Okay, the nucleolus does have some control over protein synthesis. Okay? That's about the only thing that's actively controlled from the nucleus. Okay? And the only reason it's controlled from there is because the information or the instructions on how to make proteins are in the nucleus. So when your cell needs to make something, it says to the nucleus, I need to make this stuff, I need the instructions. The nucleolus finds the instructions and copies them and sends out a copy of the instructions to the cell. That's how protein synthesis essentially works. Okay? So that's why people get this idea that the cell controls, the nucleus, controls stuff. It doesn't really control anything, it just provides the information necessary to do it. Okay? So that's the nucleus. They both have that. They both have a nucleolus. Okay? The nucleus is surrounded by a special kind of membrane that basically only allows genetic material in and out. Okay? We don't want anything to get into the nucleus. It's got really important stuff in there. It's a high security area. Okay? Outside of the nucleus, usually surrounding the nucleus, we see this bumpy, layered stuff. Okay? And you can see that here in the plant cell as well. That's the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay? They both have that. Okay? The rough endoplasmic reticulum does some stuff with transporting proteins. Okay? The reason it does that is because the little bumps that are all over it, called ribosomes, which both of them have, are actually where proteins are made. Then you can see that there's, off the rough endoplasmic reticulum, there's this stuff that kind of looks like it but doesn't have any ribosomes on it. That's the smooth endoplasmic reticulum because it doesn't have the bumps all over it. Okay? They both have that as well. Both plant and animal cells have this structure here. Okay? This is the Golgi apparatus. Okay? Golgi apparatus sorts, processes, and packages wastes for removal from the cell. Garbage. Okay? They both have this, or these. There'll be lots of those within the cell. I don't know why there aren't very many in these cells, but those are the mitochondria. That's where cellular respiration occurs, right? Where glucose is broken down for energy, so they obviously both need that. Okay? They're both also filled with a fluid. Okay? And I don't mean the water vacuole, I mean the cell is filled with a fluid, okay, called cytoplasm or cytosol. Okay? It's fairly watery, but not like just water. And that's what allows diffusion of materials to move stuff around the cell. They have to be full of this fluid as opposed to air. They're also going to, I mean, there's lots of structures that they're going to have in common. That's just a few to name to kind of start with. But one thing that is different, animal cells have these two things, plants don't. Those two things are called centrioles. And don't worry, I'm going to get into all this. You'll need to write it down. It's actually in your notes package. Okay, centrioles help with cell division. Animal cells have them, plants don't. The reason plants don't have them is because the shape of a plant cell doesn't change very much. An animal cell's shape can change a lot. And if that happens while the cell is organizing its genetic material during cell division, some of the genetic material might end up in the wrong cells. We've talked about how bad that can be. So the centrioles, during cell division, one will go to each side of the cell, and they'll send out little, so when the cell's dividing, there'll be a centriole at each end, and all of the genetic material will be lined up along what's called the metaphase plate. You never need to know that, but it's where all the genetic material will be. All your chromosomes will be sitting there. Okay? And the centrioles will send out little fibers that will attach to all of these chromosomes. Okay? And that'll make sure that each side of the cell, that new cell, gets a copy of all the genetic material, no matter what happens to the shape of the cell while the cell is dividing. Okay? It's just an extra added kind of insurance that during cell division, the DNA doesn't get lost or messed up. All right, so from an evolutionary point of view, what might this mean in terms of the ancient ancestry of plants and animals? Well, if they got that much stuff in common, it's probably because they had a common or shared ancestor at some point in the distant, very distant past. Right? And we know that from micropaleontology. We've seen some of the ancestral cells that are out there. All right. Have you guys answer these questions here? Take a lot of time to go through those, and we'll start labeling cells first thing on Wednesday. Okay, let's just kind of quickly go through these here. So main reason for the differences between plant and animal cells, 3 words. Modes of nutrition. Okay, they use different modes of nutrition. Okay, second question, what organelle supplies plants with energy? What process does it use? Chloroplasts, they use photosynthesis. Okay, what organelle supplies animal cells with energy? Lysosomes, and it uses digestion. Yeah, something about digesting food. Okay, question number 4. Transport within plant and animal cells is done in the same fashion. Why would this have been kept the same, evolutionarily speaking, when so many other things have been altered? Well, the rule of natural selection is, very simply, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, nothing better has evolved. There has been no better transport method than diffusion. Diffusion costs nothing in terms of energy. Plants can just do it. Animals can just do it. Okay? It just happens. In fact, they have no control over it. Okay? It just naturally transports things without any use of energy. Okay? And number 5, the nutritional needs of plants and animals are very different. Which would have survived best in a primordial earth that had very little oxygen or organic material available? Plants. Yeah. The very first organisms on Earth were photosynthetic, because those are the only ones that could survive. There was nothing to eat. There was no organic material that could be digested and used for food. So the first things were able to use sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, which at that time were plentiful. Okay? Very, very plentiful. Okay? So the first organisms would have been photoautotrophs, for sure. Okay. Have a good Thanksgiving weekend. Eat lots of turkey. Enjoy the tryptophan now.